This week, as our bat mitzvah girls can tell us, we are studying and reading the final portion in the book of Leviticus. The whole book of Leviticus is one that generally sees the world in terms of stark black and white legislation. This food is kosher, that one is not. This behavior is permitted, and that one is forbidden. This place is holy, and that one is secular. And what we find in Parshat Bechukotai, this week's last portion of the book, along with the Haftarah portion we'll read tomorrow from the book of Jeremiah, is that strict binary approach to Jewish life extends as well to Jewish moral theology. The text goes into great detail about the value of observing God's commandments, but the detail of these guidelines belies their simplicity. The religious ideology in these commandments is exquisitely simple. If you observe the commandments, good things will happen to you. If you break the commandments, you'll be stricken with suffering and disaster. The Torah divides all of human behavior and all of human relationship with God into this dichotomy. Those who follow God's laws will prosper. Those who disregard them will suffer. The Parsha gives us numerous examples of blessings and curses that it presents as the consequences of the choices we make about how to behave. Your crops may thrive or they may wither. Your communities may be wealthy or impoverished. The weather may be mild or punishing. Your bodies may be healthy and fit or sickly and weak. All of these circumstances are presented in this portion as the outcomes of the moral and spiritual choices we make on any given day. Today, most of us modern, rational people reject this understanding of how the world works. We know so much more than our ancestors did in the days the Torah was written. We know more about health and medicine, about meteorology, about agriculture and economics. And not only that, but all of us have seen with our own eyes that at times the most despicable and amoral individuals in society often seem to be the ones who enjoy the greatest measures of wealth and success. Good things often happen to bad people in the world, and bad things happen to good people too. Despite the sanctity of our holy texts, their ancient outlook on human suffering simply does not comprise a reasonable way to understand the moral universe. Unless you are deeply invested in celebrity news of the rabbi world, or if you are an avid reader of the national obituaries, you may have missed the news of a significant loss in the North American Jewish world. When Rabbi Harold Kushner died 2 weeks ago, his death was met with a great sadness throughout much of the Jewish community. Rabbi Kushner's day job was as a congregational rabbi at a conservative synagogue outside Boston. But the thing he was best known for was his writing. Rabbi Kushner wrote 14 books during his career, the most famous of which is this one, a book which is probably the most influential modern text of all about those moral and theological questions raised by the book of Leviticus. Rabbi Kushner literally wrote the book on why bad things happen to good people. Well, let me be more precise, because during his life, he would have been very particular about this point, and if he was here, he would stand up right now to correct me, because he didn't actually write the book about why bad things happen to good people. He wrote about when bad things happen to good people. He was insistent about pointing out the difference when the name of his book was misquoted because, as he frequently reminded his students and his readers, so many of these questions about why are ultimately unknowable and inexplicable. As a congregational rabbi, Kushner had a front row seat to the agonizing realities of human suffering. And he also experienced it personally as a father who experienced the tragic illness and death of one of his children, an experience which plunged him into his own crisis of faith and disbelief. This was the book that resulted from that process. And since it was written in 1981, it has been translated into 12 different languages, and has been printed in more than 4 million copies. At the core of the book is Kushner's assertion that the most productive view of suffering is to make that analytical shift from asking why to asking how. To move away from asking why bad things happen toward an exploration of how we will choose to live in a world where bad things happen all the time. He writes in here, "What did I do to deserve this?" is an understandable outcry from a sick and suffering person, but it's really the wrong question. Being sick or being healthy is not a matter of what God decides that we deserve. A better question is, if this has happened to me, what do I do now? And who's here to help me do it? Kushner agrees at root with the theology of Leviticus that our moral choices are important. Where he disagrees is in his assertion that our moral choices are the only factor that determines how much joy or suffering we experience in our lives. Instead, he teaches, our moral choices are influential primarily in helping us determine what our lives will mean. Our experiences in this inscrutable and chaotic world where people get sick and people thrive for often totally incomprehensible reasons. Our experience here may very well lead us to conclude that God is capricious and uncaring. But our experiences with pain might just as well lead us to the conclusion that, in the face of terrible suffering, even there is deep significance in the support and understanding we can lend one another. As modern, logical thinkers, we know what the Torah gets wrong in the theology of Leviticus. Our health, our prosperity, and well-being are not determined exclusively by the goodness or wickedness of our deeds. So many things are simply and frustratingly out of our hands. What is up to us, though, is our choices about how we will respond, how we will choose to make ourselves different because of the various sufferings and celebrations that fill our days on earth. The book of Leviticus ends with this long list of blessings and curses held up as a promise and a warning to God's people. In a way, the book ends in a beautiful symmetry with how it began. The first words of Leviticus, Vayikra el Moshe, God called out to Moses. So this central volume of the 5 books begins with a call to relationship, and it ends the same way, with God's longing for a deep and enduring connection with us. All of us experience our own measures of blessings and curses in life. It can be destabilizing to acknowledge that they may have arrived in our lives randomly, rather than as the result of our moral or spiritual choices. But it can be deeply empowering to realize that our blessings and curses can serve as well as the cause of other meaningful religious choices. Blessings of our lives can lead us to words and acts of love, to caregiving and nurturing, to deeds of support and generosity and kindness. And the suffering in our lives can in turn lead us to sympathy, to human connection, to the kind of emotional vulnerability that nurtures care and attachment to others. The great gift of Rabbi Kushner's teaching about when bad things happen to good people was his gentle and encouraging framing of the truth that we become acquainted with God's presence on earth through the love and compassion we offer to others as a moral response to difficulty and struggle. In this world where pain is unavoidable and often incomprehensible, we can be guided by Kushner's words and his memory, right alongside those of the book of Leviticus, which begins and ends with a call to relationship and connection. In our relationship with God and with the ones we share with each other, let us be led forward in conscience and compassion to offer one another resilience and strength. And so our reading of this holy and troubling book ends as we recite the words of our tradition, Chazak, Chazak, Venit Chazek, be strong be strong, and let us be strengthened together. Amen.